Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Do you ever feel like you just don't have the time to sit down and read the news every morning? Sometimes things get so hectic you can't even scroll through your feeds while you're trying to get ready. A podcast from Boise State Public Radio has you covered. I'm George Prentice, and I want to invite you to check out The Connector every weekday morning. You can get up to speed on all of the Idaho news you need to start your day without ever interrupting your morning routine. All you have to do is hit play. That's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. It's Idaho Matters. About a fifth of registered voters turned out at the ballot box last night, and they made decisions that will affect all of us in the form of school trustees, property taxes, and local leaders like mayors and city council people. The new foothills levy, lots of school bonds and levies, and some contested races in Boise and Caldwell got a lot of attention. But some of the smaller races also boosted turnout. So let's break it all down. And here for another award-winning post-election coverage panel are James Dawson with Boise State Public Radio News, Scott McIntosh, opinion editor with the Idaho Statesman, and Kevin Richards, senior reporter and blogger with Idaho Education News. Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Hello. Happy Wednesday.
Hey. Okay, so we're going to get into some serious stuff, but before we do, I understand that no one has been able to figure out why there was a Bigfoot on my ballot when I voted in Boise in Ada County. I have been getting emails and questions from people who also saw an outline of Bigfoot at the top of their ballot. I don't know why. We want to know why. If you know why and you're listening to us at this moment, email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu and tell us, because we want to know. It's a mystery. It's a voting mystery, a ballot box mystery. All right, Jimmy, let's start with you. Foothills levy. The one thing that was on every Boise ballot, maybe not always Bigfoot, but the new Foothills levy. Jimmy, can you break down what the levy does?
Yeah, so over the next 2 years, it will raise $11 million from property taxes to pay for land acquisition, to, like the title of the question, preserve open space and go toward clean water projects. So it might be familiar to people who have lived in Boise for at least 10 years, because this is the third one of these. You had the original Foothills levy passed in 2001, that mostly focused on, as the name implies, the foothills and foothill trails, places that, a whole lot of hikers and mountain bikers and, anyone who lives in Boise practically has probably been to at least one of the sites that has been preserved with this money. And then in 2015, voters passed another one of these that also went to foothills preservation, but more recently, it's also been used to pay for three pieces of land in West Boise that will eventually become city parks, or at least they're slated to become city parks. And that's kind of what this one is more tailored to is, sure, I don't think that they're going to pass up any opportunity to, get more foothills land if possible, if it's in the cards. But, advocates told me that they want to focus on more of these community and neighborhood areas that more people can benefit in places like Southeast Boise or West Boise. And so, that's what this one's going to pay for. Plus, they'll also take clean water proposals. And this is something, too, that I don't think maybe a lot of people know, is that individuals and groups and neighborhood associations can actually propose these projects to the city. They have their own advisory council that kind of analyzes these projects, and they make recommendations to city council.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I like that. And I knew I was, titling it wrong as the new Foothills levy, because it does do so much more than that now than the first one, as you said. So Drum roll. I don't have one. And when the votes were counted, was this a landslide?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, 81% passage.
Oh, wow.
That's insane. That's 5% higher than the 2015 levy. It just seems to get more and more popular every time the city runs one of these. To put it into context, I mean, think about competitive races for political offices that have two candidates. So campaign managers and politicians really feel like, oh, wow, I got 56% or 58% of the vote compared to my opponent's 44 or 42%. They think that that's a landslide. 60% is kind of unheard of in these competitive races. So 80% is, pretty monumental.
And you actually went into the foothills to find out anyone who might oppose it. And, to be fair, this does raise property taxes a little bit on folks. Did you find anybody who was against this?
No, I didn't. And yeah, it does raise about $40 a year for the average homeowner in Boise, for the next 2 years. I tried talking to about 15 or 20 people. I was out there for, 45 minutes or so on one afternoon, and all but one of them said they didn't know anything about the levy, which, it's not really a surprise given that it's an off-year election and turnout is much more down than it is during, say, a presidential or a gubernatorial, election. Ada County as a whole had 30% turnout. I think it could be a mix of both, people not knowing what was going on or that there was an election happening. And also, microphones are kind of intimidating. So I have plenty of people turn me down because they just don't want to talk on mic as well.
But I feel like I want to interject here. I mean, this is so different than it was in 2001. I mean, that was one of the first things that I covered when I came to Boise in 2001, when I started the job that Scott is doing better now with the Statesman. This was a big deal. This is a big election in 2001. It's pretty low key right now. It's become kind of almost a fixture in terms of city policy.
I remember when the first one, came up, there was a lot of controversy. Do we need this? Should we do this? How will it work? And we should point out that the city has purchased several parcels in the foothills, with the first levy at least, that that people are using today to run around on.
And way back in the day, in 2001, this was Lauren McLean's introduction to Boise politics. She was an organizer, one of the driving forces behind the original foothills levy. So it's funny how it's all changed and evolved over time.
Yes, yes, it is. And that's where we're talking about asking for cash, property taxes. Kevin, all the school bonds on the ballot last night failed, including one in Camas County that voters apparently really didn't like. Can you start, though, with Gooding? How much was it? What was it supposed to be for?
Yeah, so bond issues, as you mentioned, they went 0 for 4 last night, and that's not terribly. That's not a surprise. I mean, Jimmy's talking about how the foothills levy or the open space levy passed with 81% support. Every bond issue, whether it's for a school or anything else, requires 2/3 support. So these are tough to pass. Gooding's, as you said, was the largest of the bunch. It was $26.4 million. It would have gone towards renovations of schools. It would have gone into expansion of their vocational agricultural building. It did not get to that 2/3 supermajority that they needed to pass.
And neither did Fremont. They also wanted a big chunk of change. How much? What for?
They wanted $17 million, and really the centerpiece of what they wanted was an auditorium at the high school, at South Fremont High School, that would have been an addition to their performing arts offerings. As I say, these are tough to pass, and this should not be surprising to see that these bond issues failed. But Camas County is an interesting story.
Camas, apparently folks really hated that one. Talk about a blowout, more or less. They didn't want that.
They did, but it's an unusual situation in Camas County. By the numbers, this bond issue, which would have been $1.75 million, which is quite a bit in a really, really small district like Camas County, 85% of voters opposed that bond issue. So it didn't it didn't come close to the two-thirds supermajority that needed to pass. But there's a quirk here. Basically, what happens now is Camas County can now qualify for some state money that might actually wind up paying for the project that they were asking for with the bond issue. But in order to qualify for the state money, Camas County had to go to their voters, they had to run a bond issue, they had to show the state that they could not pass a bond issue. So basically, you had the superintendent up there essentially campaigning against the bond issue that was on the ballot. His job basically was to have it on the ballot, and now that it's been voted down, they can qualify for state assistance. The superintendent, Kevin Lancaster, he spoke to Sean Dolan, our reporter who covered this a few weeks ago, and he said, it's kind of weird that I'm campaigning against a bond issue. I should be able to succeed at that, don't you think? Yeah, asking voters to say no to a bond issue is a pretty easy ask. So now we'll see what happens with state funding for this project.
Interesting. Okay, I think you kind of cleared up the question between bonds and levies there, and we'll get to levies in just a minute. But first, Jimmy and Scott, the biggest race in Boise had to be the three-way race for a city council seat, and I don't think blowout is too big a word for this one. Jimmy, do you want to break down the Halliburton race?
Sure. So, I mean, this is one of the races where we had an incumbent. Jimmy Halliburton has been on city council for a couple terms now. Former executive director of the Boise Bicycle Project, and he was facing off against Lynn Bradescu, who is a longtime Republican, activist and operator within those circles, as well as a real estate agent in the North End. And Lisa Sanchez, who's a former Boise City Council person. She served alongside Jimmy Halliburton. They were friends at one time. But she a couple of years ago, she says she inadvertently moved out of her district when the city council districts were first taking shape in the city after the state lawmakers passed a law enforcing those. And then she was, removed from office at that point because she had moved out of her district. Cue the long legal saga that we've been over for the past few years ever since then, that she lost, by the way. But, this race didn't even come close. I mean, Jimmy Halliburton won with 71% of the vote. Lynn Bradescu, who was kind of courting the anti-interfaith sanctuary shelter votes from Veterans Memorial Park neighborhood folks, and those, kind of in Northwest Boise, closer toward downtown. She got 22% of the vote over Lisa Sanchez, again, former city council member, got 7% of the vote. Not even close. And voters really had a strong idea of who they wanted to represent them.
Scott, you want to chime in here? There was a lot of money, a lot of footwork put into this race. Were the results surprising? I mean, we don't usually get a polling on Idaho races.
Yeah. No, I don't think it was surprising. And, people have been pointing fingers at campaign manager for Lynn Bradescu. But, she could have spent $1 million in this campaign and she still wouldn't have gotten more than 22%. I mean, I think it's she campaigned against the zoning code rewrite. She campaigned against the interfaith sanctuary, kind of vague references to the budget and spending too much money, and it just didn't take. It's the voters in this district, and really the voters all over the city of Boise, just said, no, you're doing a good job. We want to keep going the way we're going.
Yeah, it was an interesting race. And, like I said, sometimes it's hard to feel those out in general because we don't have the polling, and sometimes you can guess, but you never know. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I do think, if there was a surprise in this race, it was the fact that Lisa Sanchez did so poorly with like 7% of the vote. I think there was some speculation that she and Jimmy Halliburton might split the liberal progressive vote and give Bradescu a path to sneak in there. So maybe there was some coalescence around Jimmy to make sure that there wasn't a split vote. But if anything, if there's a surprise in that, it was that Lisa Sanchez didn't do as well. She won her last election against a conservative candidate with 57% of the vote. So there was speculation that she could have, should have, would have done better than that, but really didn't really perform very well Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. There was another three-way city council race in Boise, and another incumbent won last night. Jimmy, who was running and who won?
Yeah, so this was Council President Colin Nash, who was running for his second term on Boise City Council, and he smashed it, 69% again for an incumbent, which wasn't always the case around the Treasure Valley last night, specifically thinking about Caldwell mayor, that particular election. But Colin Nash, he got 69% of the vote against two political newcomers for this West Boise district, those being Derek James Smith and Josh Elstrom. And, kind of taking this with the Jimmy Halliburton race where he won by 71%, no one challenging Jordan Morales, who represents part of the Boise bench in Southeast Boise. That just really suggests to me that at least voters in these districts are happy with the representation that they've had, and want to keep that going forward.
Scott, I think this was the year that I really felt that new way of doing city council races in Boise. We don't do it all at once anymore. We have real districts now. It used to be just sort of a melting pot, but it's still pretty new for Boise, even though we've done it a while. Can we do the Wayback Machine? When and how did this change from everybody gets to vote for everybody to what we're doing now?
Yeah, this was a state law that was passed in 2020. And so 2021 was actually the first time that Boise City Council was elected by district. And I won't bore you with all the machinations because there were some machinations that we had to jump through. But this is actually the third time that Boise City voters have voted by district. And it does seem like it's becoming normalized and people are kind of getting their brains around it. It's interesting because, it's disappointing that Jordan Morales didn't have any opponents, but, Colin Nash had two challengers, and Jimmy Halliburton had two challengers. And I'm starting to see district specific issues come to the forefront. I think that, Derek Smith and Josh Elstrom ran a good campaign against Colin Nash and really, very knowledgeable and researched the issues. But, the folks over in West Boise in that district are looking for a library branch. And if you had a candidate who ran against Colin Nash saying, hey, where's our library branch? You're not delivering for your district. That could have been a more contentious race. And that did come up a little bit, but not quite enough. But you are starting to see some of these district specific issues that are healthy for our democracy and for these city council races, that some of these folks in the districts that might otherwise not be heard are getting a voice against some of these incumbents.
Well, that was one of the main arguments for passing that law in 2020, mistakes aside, where we had to redraw the maps, at significant expense. But that was one of the things that, Senate Pro Tem Chuck Winder, the former Pro Tem anyway, said that, he's a West Boise resident, didn't feel that West Boise was being represented, and felt that cities over 100,000 should have these sorts of districts to bring up these issues at city council levels.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, Boise has grown quite a bit. And it makes a certain amount of sense to break it up into districts to reach those local that's a good word, issues that you're talking about, Scott.
Yeah, and you can cater to your district rather than just have 6 council members from the North End representing the whole city. You've got to have council member from each one of those districts, and when they vote, they're ostensibly supposed to be voting in favor of their districts.
All right, Kevin, 26 school districts had supplemental levies on the ballot. It was about $101 million. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of districts. Is this pretty much how things are now for schools when they need cash for extra stuff?
It's definitely the new normal, and I would even call it the new normal, really. I mean, this has been building for at least 20 years, where more and more school districts are having to go back to voters to say that they need additional funding to fill in gaps in areas that they feel like the state hasn't adequately funded. If you talk to enough school administrators, you will inevitably run into administrators who just bristle at the term supplemental when it comes to levies. They feel like this is an essential. In a lot of cases, these are levies that we've seen before because they only run 1 or 2 years in general. Districts in general have to then come back to voters every year or two to ask for another round of the levy. So sometimes you'll see the exact same amount that districts are seeking. They just have to go back over and over. And, administrators will say not only do they need the money, but this creates a system where they have to go back to voters every year or two, that it creates uncertainty, that there's, you know, you never know for sure that you're going to get a levy passed. So you never really know for sure how that's going to affect your funding picture going forward.
Well, to your point about, some saying that these really aren't supplemental, I saw a lot of this quote: levy largely would pay for staff salaries and benefits, kept cropping up when I was looking at your very comprehensive list of levies on your website. And is it fair to say that school districts just need more money to do what they do, even when it comes down to not extra stuff, but paying for teachers and other folks who work at the school?
Definitely fair to say. I don't have the exact number right in front of me right now as to how many of Idaho's 115 school districts have a supplemental levy on the books. It is the vast majority. It has run around 90 districts, give or take a couple here or there. And you focused in on the staff needs. It kind of stands to reason that a lot of these supplemental levies, a lot of the money would go towards staff needs. I mean, that's the biggest expense in any school district. It's your salaries and benefits. It's your staff. It's your teaching talent. I mean, that's where a lot of your money inevitably winds up going. But you're right. It's a recurring theme that we saw in the supplemental levies, large and small, on Tuesday night. The biggest supplemental levy of the bunch was over in Nampa. Almost half of that money would go towards salaries and benefits. Stands to reason. Again, it's their biggest expense. Nampa has to compete to recruit and retain teachers against districts like Boise that historically have paid more. You go to the Three Creek school districts, way down on the road to jackpot, one of the most remote and smallest school districts in the state. They had I think it was a $67,000 supplemental levy, and most of that money would go towards staffing. So staffing is a recurring theme when you look at these levies.
And overall, how did the levies do last night? Because again, we're talking about raising property taxes, however, in little bits and pieces, but it's still a property tax hike.
It was a mixed bag, Samantha. Of the 26 that were on the ballot, 17 passed. Now that's that's about 2/3. But historically, we've seen supplemental levies pass at a higher percentage than that. So that's a little bit interesting to me, and I haven't been able to really dig into what happened with those levies Tuesday night, and it's hard to maybe draw generalities when you're talking about really hyper-local elections all over the state. But 17 out of 26 is not a great track record relative to what we've seen in past election cycles.
All right. Scott, the Caldwell Police School Resource Officer, Eric Phillips, beat Caldwell Mayor Jerome Wagner and current City Council member Brad Doty in a surprise upset. Your editorial board had endorsed the current mayor and had some reservations about Phillips. So give us the background. What happened here? This was an upset.
Yeah, it was an upset and it was a surprise. Incumbency tends to have its advantages. But there's been a lot of drama in Caldwell over the past 4 years since Wagner became mayor. Reminder that Wagner took over from Garrett Nancolis, who was mayor for 24 years,
Wow.
I think, or 20 or 24 years. Longtime mayor. There were a lot of retirements when Garrett retired. And so Jerome Wagner had to bring in a lot of new people. They had a new police chief, Rex Ingram, who was hired And over the past 4 years, there have been at least 3 city employees who have sued the city for wrongful termination. There's been a police officer who had faced criminal charges. And then there was a FBI investigation of the police department. So there's been a lot of drama going on in the city. Earlier this year, City Council voted to lease a 4-acre lot of city-owned property near the fairgrounds to build hotels on, and that drew a lot of opposition. And I think that was one of the main forces in opposition. I think it was surprising though, because when you have an opposition campaign, when there's people who are opposed to the incumbent, you usually have that split vote. And I think there was, an understanding that Brad Doty and Eric Phillips were going to split that vote, and at the very least force a runoff. So the fact that Eric Phillips received 57% of the vote, and Brad Doty really did not receive very much support, and Jaron Wagner received only about 30% of the vote. So it was pretty surprising. And so we're going to have a new mayor in Eric Phillips in Caldwell.
Well, and I was looking for factors that might have contributed to that turnout. Phillips had a big Facebook page. Did that have an impact? Phillips was also involved in I think it was the Homeland Security's welfare check on Idaho migrant students. Tell us a little more on this.
Yeah, so Eric Phillips was a school resource officer with the Caldwell School District. And I don't want to say whistleblower, but he was kind of a whistleblower. The Department of Homeland Security was doing these health and welfare checks of students in school districts all over the country, not just Idaho. And they came to Caldwell and were doing these so-called health and welfare checks on students. And Eric Phillips, as the director of student safety as a school resource officer in Caldwell, kind of flagged this and brought it to the superintendent's attention and said, hey, I don't know if we've got an immigration issue here. We've got a student privacy issue here. This doesn't seem right. And DHS backed off on that. And the Caldwell School Board stood their ground on that. But Eric Phillips also ran a very successful Facebook group, Caldwell Community. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it has 30,000 followers, and the city of Caldwell has 77,000 people. So 30,000 followers in this group was pretty significant. And if you look at the comments, they are very supportive of Eric Phillips, and so I think he had a very strong following among that group. And that group was also, it fomented a lot of that small town drama. Even though it's 77,000 people, there's just a lot of gossip and rumor mongering and accusations of corruption. And that, was kind of just fomenting in that Facebook group. And I think helped Phillips over the top and win that election.
Okay. Here are a few more election results from last night. Rural fire districts looking for cash didn't do so well. Budget increases failed for Parma, Star, Middleton, and Garden Valley Fire Protection Districts. An ambulance district levy in Gooding County failed, as did Payette County's $40 million jail renovation and expansion bond. Let's get back to our election results with James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News, Scott McIntosh with the Idaho Statesman, and Kevin Richert with Idaho Education News. Secretary of State Phil McGrain said statewide turnout was about 21% last night. We did some reporting here at the station about how voter turnout was likely to be low and how recreation districts in a couple of counties may have increased turnout. Valley and Blaine County both saw some healthy turnout. Recreation districts may have been a factor. Jimmy, what happened with the Mountain Community Recreation District? I think this was the McCall one. How did that work out?
Worked out pretty well. It got 64% of the vote to create this district. And it's around McCall and goes a little bit south toward Lake Fork and Donnelly. This is an effort to create a new indoor recreation center somewhere near McCall within that boundary line. It's envisioned to be pretty substantial. I mean, we're talking about 120,000 square feet in the preliminary design. And if you think about it, McCall averages more than 130 inches of snow a year. So if you're not really into snow sports, or maybe you're older or you have mobility issues, could be a way to get exercise during those long winter months. It is envisioned to host youth sports, a turf field, a track, and maybe some courts of some type. According to the campaigners, if fundraising is good on the private side, they said that they could build a bigger center with more courts, conference rooms to make it even more of a community space, possibly commercial space too.
Hmm.
They're eyeing three spots, one near the current activity barn. There's a county-owned site in Lake Fork that's a possibility, or also a more centrally located site in McCall. They just haven't made that decision as to where they kind of want to focus.
And Valley County had one too, a recreation district. How did it do?
Uh, you mean the Blaine County one?
Oh, sorry, Blake County.
Yes, Blaine County, they were trying to add another $3 million on top of the money that they already collect.
Hmm.
And that failed because even though it got a majority, it got more than 55% of the vote. This is something that, like school bonds in Idaho, needs a supermajority or 2/3 of the vote to pass.
Gotcha. And Kevin, Blaine County also had a school levy on the ballot, I think. What for? How did it do?
Yeah, so what I found interesting about the Blaine County supplemental levy, we talked in the previous segment about how a lot of this money goes towards staff and salaries. Blaine County was one of the districts that had a supplemental that would have gone, but will now go largely towards special education. And that's a trend that our Emma Epperly wrote about before the election. Again, not surprising when you think about all the talk that we've heard over the past few months about special education funding in the state. And you've got State Superintendent Debbie Critchfield hoping to get the legislature to put more money into special education. A big funding gap that districts are facing between their needs and what's being funded by the state and the feds. So it's not surprising to see a district like Blaine County seeking a supplemental largely for special education. It passed. McCall Donnelly's supplemental levy also passed.
And Scott, I think we're getting back to how passionate issues can bring up the turnout at an off year, which we are having now. It doesn't have a lot of state or federal races at stake. I don't think it has any. But you've got these local issues like recreation districts and school levies that do get people to come out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that city council races and off-year county commission races, that kind of thing, off-year elections don't get as much attention because they do. I think they have more of an impact on your daily life and your tax bill than a lot of other races. But these special races really draw people out, which is great. I remember in CUNA when I was covering CUNA back in the day, and they had a bond on the ballot for a new city hall. I think it was the highest turnout that the CUNA had ever seen up until that point. So it's great, and I think it's a good argument for election consolidation. Voter turnout is even lower in March and May, and so maybe we should be putting more of these ballot issues and bonds and levies on the November ballot and try to get some economies of scale or critical mass to get people to come out to vote on these issues.
And Kevin, in the Every Vote Counts department, you saw some very close races last night. How close was the valley to your levy? Because I was still looking at your website a couple hours ago. Some of the races we're going to talk about now were very, very close.
Yeah, so we're talking about 4 votes. Now, this is a small school district, but 4 votes any place is a really narrow margin. That was the gap in this race, and this levy failed by 4 votes. interesting. Similar levy was on the ballot over there in May. It failed by 7 votes. So you've got a very divided community on this. And our Sean Dolan did a really interesting story a few days before the election about some of the grassroots opposition to that levy. But yes, I mean, especially in some of these really low turnout and really hyper local elections, a few votes here or there can swing the balance.
Like in Orofino levy?
Oh yes, let's look at Orofino's levy. That was another one. I'm scrolling up. It passed. Margin was 14 votes. So yeah, you look at some of these smaller districts and some of these supplemental levies that are, administrators will think are really important to day-to-day operations. It doesn't take many votes one way or the other to determine the outcome.
And same thing in Mountain Home?
And Mountain Home, yes. Let me scroll up and get the exact number. It passed by 20 votes. So again, very, very small margins, and just a reminder to voters or voters who aren't sure they want to go out and vote, your voice does count.
It really can make a difference, especially in smaller communities. So as we continue to break down the results, Kevin, maybe this shows a little bit of my stodginess, but did I see that political PACs put money into the West Ada school trustee race? Really? Aren't these nonpartisan races?
You're not stodgy. What you're observing is something that is really changing in a lot of school board elections, and not just in Idaho. We've seen school board politics have become very polarized. No surprise here after everything that has happened over the past few years between the pandemic and the school's response to the pandemic, social issues regarding education. It's not surprising to see that kind of spending. It's happened in other districts around the country. West Ada, those were fascinating school board elections because you had so much going on. You're talking about the money, and definitely the two incumbents, Lori Frazier and Redford, both received funding largely from groups aligned with Republican politics. The two challengers in the race received money from a PAC that had ties to the National Education Association. Defining issue in this race was the whole controversy over the "Everyone is Welcome Here" signs that the district asked then middle school teacher Sarah Anama to take down in the spring. So a lot to unwrap in those elections, but when you talk about the funding, yes, we're seeing that happen to a larger degree in school board elections than we've seen in the past. And these are still nonpartisan races, but this race definitely had some partisan overtones. To cut to the chase here, though, it was a mixed result because Lori Frazier, who's the chair of the school board, who was on the board during this whole "Everyone is Welcome Here" sign controversy, she was reelected. Angie Redford, the other incumbent who was on the ballot, who was very closely aligned politically and ideologically with Frazier, she lost and lost handily to a challenger who was really running on the "Everyone is Welcome Here" issue, really leaning into that decision from the board. So really hard to glean any kind of takeaway from those races in West Ada because the results are kind of contradictory.
And that's just, one of those school trustee setups there. I went to your election results page. There were like a zillion school trustee races. It's an official number. I am making it official. There were a lot. And I know you were focusing on some, and I know we're running out of time, but give me just a couple that were at the top of your list to watch.
Yeah, a zillion. I was told there would be no math today, but there were quite a few. I want to say that there were about 60 races across the state. That's not really that many when you think about how many school board elections could have been contested and what happens when you've got an uncontested race. It just doesn't show up on the ballot. So we were keeping an eye not only on West Ada, there were races in Nampa that we were watching, some races in North Idaho. We have a full roundup of what happened in those big races at idaho8news.org.
Scott, you had all the challengers to fill the shoes of departing Garden City Mayor John Evans in your shop to talk about why they should be mayor. There was a very clear winner. Who was it?
Yeah, we had 2 of the 3. We didn't have one of the candidates couldn't make it, but we interviewed Bill Jacobs and Molly Lenti, and that was really those were the 2 candidates that the race was between, and Bill Jacobs won fairly handily. He won with 62% of the vote, so not quite 2-1. And he was endorsed by Mayor John Evans, and John Evans is another one of those longtime popular mayors. He's been mayor for 20 years, won election 5 times, and he endorsed Bill Jacobs. And so in a lot of ways, Bill Jacobs is a continuation of the John Evans administration. Bill Jacobs has been on the city council for the past 4 years. He knows the issues, and really, you won't see a lot of changes, I think, with Bill Jacobs as the mayor from what John Evans was doing. And I think that's kind of the point of the election, was that people are happy with the direction the Garden City is going, and they want to keep it going.
And we had more to talk about, but we're running out of time. We've got about 3 minutes left. So, what were the big takeaways from last night? I'm going to go around the table. You got about a minute each. We're going to start with Scott. Scott, big takeaway.
A big takeaway was that the city of Boise is still liberal, but I also want to point out something that we didn't talk about. The public safety levy in Meridian passed with 66% of the vote. People in Meridian voted to tax themselves $5 million extra per year, a permanent levy for public safety, which should be a referendum on the state legislature's handcuffs on city budgeting.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Jimmy, big takeaway or takeaways from last night? Are you muted, Jimmy? Because we can't hear you.
Oh boy, that's embarrassing.
It's
only
okay.
been 5 years.
It's okay.
That Scott McIntosh is the latest election consolidation champion. Fully expect to see him partnering with House Speaker Mike Moyle on that in the upcoming session. But no, nothing too crazy, if I'm being serious. I mean, we had some very high voter turnout in certain areas, like we talked about. Blaine had the highest turnout in the state at 50%, almost 40% in Valley County. They had substantial local issues that seemed to drive people to the polls. Just still a shame that we're talking about 50% as a victory and off-year turnout when, Idaho has, fairly accessible ways to vote compared to many East Coast and Southern states, like no excuse absentee ballot voting, early voting, and same-day registration.
Wow. Yeah. Good point. Kevin, you got just over a minute. What was your big takeaway?
I think I'll piggyback on what Scott and Jimmy were talking about in terms of the turnout, because what we've seen now in school elections, and over the past couple of years, the legislature has really ratcheted down the number of election dates that are available to schools to run bonds and levies. Now they can only run these bonds and levies in May and in November. So that's why we saw a bunch of them on the ballot in November. We're not really seeing a big increase in turnout, and I don't know how you crack that nut. But what we are seeing is a continuation of, it's tough to pass a bond issue. It's probably going to be tough to pass a bond issue whenever you put it on the ballot. And maybe it's getting a little bit more difficult to pass a supplemental levy. I don't know that yet. And that would be a great research project for somebody to take on. But what we saw last night, it was difficult for a lot of districts to get a levy passed.
And there were a lot of districts that needed money, that were asking for money. I think that's one of my big takeaways is just how many.
And yes, are going to be doing some soul searching today and in the days to come about, okay, what do we do with this? Do we come back with another levy in May? Do we try to figure out how to make this do with what we've got?
Yeah.
Tough decisions ahead.
Yeah, we talked a lot about what they're going to do with the money if they got it, but not what they're going to do if they didn't get the money they
And
needed.
they don't have it. That's going to be happening in real time.
Oh, okay. We've been speaking with our post-election coverage panel, James Dawson with Boise State Public Radio News, Scott McIntosh, opinion editor with the Idaho Statesman, and Kevin Richards, senior reporter and blogger with Idaho Education News. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, especially after a long night, election night. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thanks,
Thanks,
Sam.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.